She thought the video call would last 15 minutes. It lasted 3 hours. And somewhere in that conversation, between jokes about bad clients and dreams about traveling the world, Maya Santos fell in love with a voice coming through her phone screen at 2 in the morning. She didn't mean to. She wasn't looking for it. But loneliness has a way of making you vulnerable to kindness, especially when it comes from 7,000 miles away, pixelated but persistent, asking how your day was and actually waiting for the answer. Maya was 28 and living in a version of life she hadn't planned. Her apartment in Makati was small but carefully decorated, the kind of space that said she was trying even when she felt like giving up. Potted plants lined the windowsill. Framed prints of travel destinations covered one wall. Paris, New York, London, Tokyo. Places she wanted to see but couldn't afford on a graphic designer's salary that barely covered rent and her share of her younger sister's university tuition. She worked for a mid-sized marketing firm, the kind where deadlines were always yesterday and client feedback was always vague. Her coworkers were nice enough, but most were married or dating seriously, and Maya had learned to decline invitations to dinners where she'd be the only single person at the table, smiling through conversations about wedding venues and baby names. 3 years ago, she'd been engaged. His name was Carlo, and they'd been together since college. She'd loved him the way you love someone when you're young and think love is enough. They planned a small wedding, picked a date, started looking at apartments they couldn't afford. Then Maya's best friend Diane stopped answering her calls, and Carlo started working late. And one evening, Maya came home early and found them in the bed she shared with him, tangled in sheets she'd washed that morning. She moved out that night, stayed with her parents for 2 months while she found her own place, watched her entire social circle fracture as friends chose sides or awkwardly tried to remain neutral. Carlo sent apology texts for weeks. Diane sent one message that said she was sorry, but it just happened and maybe it was meant to be. Maya blocked them both and learned that heartbreak doesn't kill you, but it does hollow you out, leaves you wondering if you'll ever trust anyone again. Her life settled into a rhythm. Wake up at 6. Morning run along Ayala Avenue before the heat became unbearable. Shower, coffee, commute to the office in traffic that made her question all her life choices. Work until 7 or 8. Come home to her sister Julia, who was studying nursing and had a boyfriend and a future that looked brighter than Maya's felt. Eat dinner. Watch something on Netflix. Scroll through social media until her eyes hurt. Sleep, repeat. It was Julia who noticed first. "You're on your phone a lot lately," she said one evening, looking up from her textbook. "New guy?" Maya had laughed, brushed it off. But Julia was right. There was someone new, even if Maya wasn't ready to call him that. His name was David Richardson. They'd met in a Facebook group for graphic designers, one of those professional communities where people shared work and complained about clients who wanted logo revisions at midnight. David had posted a website mock-up, clean and modern, and Maya had commented that she loved his use of negative space. He'd messaged her privately to thank her. They'd started talking about design philosophy, then about work, then about everything else. He was 32, American, living in Tampa, Florida. A freelance web developer who worked from home, which explained why he was online at odd hours that matched her evening, his morning. He had dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that crinkled at the corners. She knew because they'd moved from messaging to video calls within a few weeks, and those calls became the best part of her day. David was different from Filipino men she'd dated. He asked questions and remembered the answers. He sent good morning messages with coffee emojis. He laughed at her jokes, the self-deprecating ones about being perpetually single that usually made people uncomfortable. He talked about his own loneliness, living alone in a city where he didn't have many friends, working jobs that paid the bills but didn't fulfill him. He told her about his childhood in Ohio, his parents who'd divorced when he was young, his love for old movies and terrible puns. He asked about her family, her dreams, what she wanted from life beyond the 9-to-5 grind. And he listened, really listened. Not the way men listen when they're waiting for their turn to talk, but the way that makes you feel seen. Maya's friends were skeptical when she mentioned him. "You haven't even met him in person," her cousin said over lunch. "How do you know he's real? How do you know he's even who he says he is?" But Maya had done her research. She'd found his LinkedIn profile, his freelance portfolio website, his Instagram account that went back years, pictures of him at coffee shops, at the beach, with his dog who died last year and he still got sad talking about. The video calls were proof enough. She could see him, hear him, watch his expressions change in real time. He wasn't a catfish using someone else's photos. He was real, sitting in his apartment in Tampa, wearing hoodies and drinking coffee from a mug that said, "I turn coffee into code," making her laugh when she'd had the kind of day that made her want to quit everything. 8 months into their friendship, or whatever it was, Maya realized she was in love with him. Not infatuation, not the desperate loneliness that makes you cling to anyone who pays attention. Love. The kind that settles into your chest and stays there, warm and stubborn and terrifying. She hadn't told him. Wasn't sure how. What do you say to someone you've never touched, never sat beside, never kissed? How do you explain that you've fallen for a voice and a face on a screen and the way he says your name, instead of may, getting it wrong in a way that feels endearing rather than ignorant? It was late November when David mentioned feeling lonely about the upcoming holidays. His family was scattered, and he usually spent Thanksgiving and Christmas alone, ordering takeout and watching movies. He said it casually, but Maya heard the sadness underneath. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Julia's soft breathing from the other room, and made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. She would go to Tampa. She would surprise David for his birthday in December. She would finally meet him in person, and maybe, just maybe, the feeling that had been building between them for 8 months would translate into something real. The flight cost most of her savings, Manila to Tampa with a layover in Tokyo. Business class was out of the question, but she found an economy seat that wouldn't completely destroy her budget. She booked 2 weeks, telling herself that was enough time to know if this was real or just a beautiful fantasy she'd built in her head. She didn't tell David. That was the surprise part. She told him she'd be busy with a major project at work, that she might not be able to video call as much for a few weeks. He was disappointed but understanding. "I'll miss our talks," he said, "but I get it. Work comes first." She felt guilty lying, but the thought of seeing his face when she showed up at his door made the guilt worth it. Her mother was not supportive. "You're flying to America to meet a stranger from the internet. Maya, use your brain. What if he's dangerous? What if he's married? What if he's not even who he says he is?" Her father was quieter but equally concerned, asking practical questions about where she'd stay, whether she had emergency contacts, if she'd registered her trip with the embassy. Julia was the only one who seemed to understand, even if she had reservations. "I think you're crazy," she said, helping Maya pack. "But I also think you need to do this. You've been stuck for 3 years, 8, since Carlo. Maybe this is how you move forward." She hugged Maya at the airport, made her promise to call every day, to be careful, to come home if anything felt wrong. Maya bought David a birthday gift before she left. A custom watch from a small jeweler in Greenbelt, silver with a simple face, both their initials engraved on the back where only he would see. It cost more than she should have spent, but she wanted him to have something tangible, something that said, "This matters, you matter, we matter." The flight was long and uncomfortable and filled with second-guessing. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if seeing her in person changed everything? What if the chemistry they had online evaporated the moment they occupied the same physical space? She tried to sleep but couldn't, her mind racing through scenarios, most of them ending badly. But underneath the anxiety was something else. Excitement, hope, the feeling that she was finally doing something for herself, taking a risk, choosing possibility over safety. For 3 years she'd played it safe, kept her heart locked up, refused to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. David had slipped past her defenses without even trying, and now she was 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward him with nothing but faith that what they'd built over video calls and late-night messages could become something real. The plane landed in Tampa on a Tuesday morning. Maya cleared customs, collected her luggage, and stood in the arrivals terminal feeling suddenly, overwhelmingly terrified. She had his address, she had the Uber app open on her phone. All she had to do was get in a car and show up at his door. Her hands shook as she confirmed the ride. This was it. No turning back. In less than an hour, she would see him, touch him, know for certain whether the feeling between them could survive the translation from digital to physical. The Tampa morning was humid and bright, so different from Manila's version of tropical heat. The Uber driver made small talk about the weather, asked if she was visiting family. Maya said yes, not wanting to explain the truth. That she was here for a man she'd never met, carrying a birthday gift and 8 months of hope, about to find out if love could exist in the space between a screen and real life. She thought she knew what would happen when he opened the door. She'd imagined it 100 times. The surprise on his face, the hug, the awkward then perfect first kiss, the beginning of their real story. But imagination is just another kind of lie we tell ourselves to make the unknown feel less frightening. And sometimes, the truth waiting on the other side of the door is nothing like the story you wrote in your head. Sometimes, it's something else entirely. The breaking point came on her 11th day in Tampa. They were sitting at a beachfront restaurant, watching the sunset paint the Gulf of Mexico in shades of orange and pink. David had been quiet during dinner, picking at his food in a way that was unusual for him. Maya knew something was coming. She could feel it in the air between them, heavy and inevitable. "I've been thinking," David said, not looking at her, "about what happens when you leave." Maya's stomach tightened. "I go back to Manila, back to work, back to my life." But what if he didn't? Now he looked at her, his blue eyes hopeful in a way that made her want to cry. "What if you stayed here, in Tampa, with me?" "David, I can't just move to America. I have a job, a family, a visa that expires in 3 days. I know it sounds crazy, but we could figure it out. You could apply for jobs here, get a work visa, or we could get married. I know that's fast, but people do it. And I love you, Maya. I've loved you since the 3rd video call we had, when you laughed so hard at my joke about the designer who walked into a bar that you snorted. I love the way you say my name with your accent. I love that you actually listen when I talk. I love everything about you." The words should have been romantic. 8 months ago, if he'd said them on a video call, Maya would have melted. But sitting across from him now, watching desperation masquerade as love, she felt only sadness and guilt. "I care about you," she said carefully. "I really do. But David, I don't love you. Not the way you need me to." His face did something complicated. Not anger, but pain mixed with denial. "You flew 7,000 miles to see me. You stayed even after you saw me in person. You've spent almost 2 weeks with me. That has to mean something. It means I wanted to give this a real chance. And I have. But I can't make myself feel something I don't feel." She reached across the table but stopped short of touching his hand. "Online, we had something. I'm not saying that wasn't real, but in person, it's different. I'm different. You're different. The chemistry isn't there for me. Is it because of how I look?" His voice was quiet, ashamed. Maya wanted to lie, wanted to tell him it had nothing to do with his weight, that it was just an incompatibility of souls or timing or some other abstract thing. But he deserved honesty, even if it hurt. "Partly," she admitted. "I'm not going to pretend physical attraction doesn't matter, but it's more than that. I feel like I'm here to fix you. Like you need me to be your reason to change, and that's not fair to either of us. I would change. I am changing. You've helped me see that I can't keep living like this. Then change for yourself, not for me. Because if you only do it to keep me, what happens when I leave? What happens when it gets hard and I'm not here to motivate you?" David's hands were shaking. He clasped them together on the table, knuckles white. "I don't want to go back to being alone. These 2 weeks, having someone to talk to in person, to do things with, it's reminded me what I've been missing. I can't go back to that apartment and that life and just pretend this didn't happen. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to let me go home." Maya felt tears building but refused to let them fall. "You're a good person, David. You're funny and smart and kind, but you're also deeply unhappy, and I can't fix that for you." They sat in silence. The sunset had finished its performance, and the sky was darkening to purple. Around them, other diners chatted and laughed, living their normal lives, unaware of the quiet devastation happening at table 12. "Will we still talk?" David asked finally. "After you leave?" Maya had been dreading this question. "I don't think that's a good idea. I think we need to make a clean break. So that's it. You're just going to disappear from my life. I'm going to go back to my life, and you're going to work on yours. Really work on it, not for me or for some future girlfriend, but for yourself." David stood up abruptly. "I need to use the bathroom." He walked away before she could respond, his gait heavy and defeated. Maya sat alone at the table, staring at her untouched dessert. She felt like the worst person in the world. She'd flown to Florida with hope and excitement and left a trail of destruction in her wake. But she also knew staying would be worse. Leading him on, pretending to feel something she didn't, would be crueler in the long run. When David returned, his eyes were red. They paid the bill in silence and drove back to Maya's hotel. The car ride felt endless, the radio playing cheerful pop songs that mocked the heaviness between them. "I'll pick you up tomorrow," David said when they pulled into the hotel parking lot. "Take you to the airport." "You don't have to do that. I can get an Uber." "I want to. Please, let me at least do that." Maya nodded and got out of the car. She watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into Tampa traffic, and wondered if she'd just broken someone who was already barely holding together. That night, she called Julia. It was early morning in Manila, and her sister answered groggily. 8? What's wrong?" Maya told her everything. The weight, the lies by omission, the 2 weeks of trying to make something work that was fundamentally broken. Julia listened without judgment, which made Maya cry harder. "You're not a bad person," Julia said when Maya finally stopped talking. "You tried. That's more than a lot of people would have done. I feel like I made everything worse. You didn't make him gain 400 pounds. You didn't make him lie about his life. Those were his choices. You just showed up and had to deal with the consequences. He said he loves me. He loves the idea of you, the woman who talked to him when he was lonely. But that's not the same as actually loving you, the real you, the complicated, messy person you are." Maya knew her sister was right, but knowing something intellectually didn't make it hurt less. The next morning, David picked her up at 9. Her flight was at 2, which gave them plenty of time, but also too much time. They didn't talk much on the drive to the airport. David kept the radio on, and they let classic rock fill the silence between them. At the departures terminal, he helped her with her luggage. They stood on the curb, cars honking around them, people rushing past with their own destinations and dramas. "I'm sorry I wasn't what you expected," David said. "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed," Maya replied. He pulled her into a hug. It was the first time they'd really embraced, and Maya let herself lean into it for a moment. He smelled like his apartment, like the life he'd been living before she arrived and would return to after she left. When they pulled apart, his eyes were wet again. "Take care of yourself," she said. "Really take care of yourself. You too. And Maya, thank you for coming. I know it didn't turn out the way either of us hoped, but it wasn't a complete waste. You reminded me that I'm capable of connecting with someone, that maybe I'm not as broken as I thought." Maya smiled sadly. "You're not broken. You're just stuck. There's a difference." She walked into the terminal without looking back. If she'd looked back, she might have seen him standing there for another 10 minutes, watching the doors she'd disappeared through, trying to memorize what it felt like to have someone care about him, even briefly, even incompletely. The flight home was long and gave Maya too much time to think. She'd spent nearly all her savings. She'd lied to her family. She'd flown across the world for a fantasy that dissolved the moment it encountered reality. But she'd also learned something crucial about herself. She'd learned that she was capable of taking risks, even if they didn't pay off. That she could be honest, even when honesty was devastating. That she could walk away from something that wasn't right, even when walking away was hard. When she landed in Manila, her mother and Julia were waiting at arrivals. Her mother took one look at her face and pulled her into a hug. "You don't have to talk about it now," she said. "Just come home." Over the following weeks, Maya settled back into her life. Work, home, the same routine she'd had before Tampa. But something had shifted. She deleted the dating apps from her phone. Stopped spending her evenings scrolling through profiles of men who might fill the empty spaces in her life. David messaged her a few times in the first month. Apologies, updates about starting to go to the gym, photos of healthy meals he was cooking. Maya responded politely but briefly, keeping firm boundaries. Eventually the messages slowed, then stopped altogether. She heard through the designer Facebook group that he'd taken down most of his portfolio, was being more honest about the work that was actually his. Someone mentioned he'd lost some weight. Maya was glad but didn't reach out. Their story was finished, and reopening that chapter would only hurt them both. 6 months after Tampa, Maya was having coffee with a friend from college when she saw a familiar face across the cafe, not David, but Carlo, her ex-fiancé. He was with a woman, not Diane, someone new. They looked happy in that casual way people do when they've been together long enough to be comfortable. Maya waited for the familiar ache, the anger, the betrayal, but it didn't come. Instead, she felt nothing. Or, not nothing, but something close to indifference. That relationship felt like it had happened to someone else, a younger version of herself who didn't know yet how resilient she could be. She realized then that Tampa hadn't been a mistake. It had been necessary. She'd needed to fly 7,000 miles to meet someone who turned out to be a carefully edited version of himself, needed to spend 2 weeks trying to force something that wouldn't work, needed to come home disappointed and wiser, because the alternative was staying safe, never risking, never hoping, building walls so high that nothing could hurt her but nothing could reach her either. And that wasn't living. That was just surviving. Julia asked her once if she regretted the trip. They were sitting in their apartment, eating takeout and watching some drama about people whose problems made theirs seem manageable. "No," Maya said, "I don't regret it." "Really? Even though it was a disaster?" "It wasn't a disaster, it just wasn't what I expected." But expectations are just stories we tell ourselves about the future. They're not real. What's real is what actually happens. And what happened was I learned I'm braver than I thought. "You also learned that online dating is a nightmare," Julia pointed out. Maya laughed. "Yeah, that too." She thought about David sometimes, wondered if he'd kept up with the gym, if he'd found a therapist, If he'd let anyone else get close enough to hurt him, she hoped he was okay. Hoped he'd learned that you can't build a relationship on loneliness and carefully angled cameras. Hoped he'd figured out how to love himself before trying to love someone else. But mostly, she thought about herself. About the woman who boarded that plane with a wrapped gift and a heart full of hope. About how that woman had been naive in some ways, but also courageous. About how disappointment hadn't destroyed her but had refined her, burned away the parts that needed burning and left something stronger behind. A year after Tampa, Maya started dating again, not online, but in person. She met Marcus at a design conference, a Filipino-American photographer who split his time between Manila and Los Angeles. They talked about art and family and the complicated experience of navigating two cultures. When he asked for her number, she gave it to him. When he asked her to dinner, she said yes. It was slower this time, more careful. She didn't fall in love over video calls or late-night messages. She fell in love over coffee and gallery visits and conversations that happened face-to-face, where she could see all of him and he could see all of her. No camera angles or careful editing. On their fifth date, Marcus asked about her travel bucket list. Maya mentioned the postcards on her wall, the cities she wanted to visit. Tampa's not on there, he observed. No, she said, Tampa's not on there anymore. Bad experience? Educational experience, she corrected. Sometimes the best lessons come from the worst trips. He smiled. That's very diplomatic. I've learned to be diplomatic about my mistakes. Is that what Tampa was? A mistake? Maya thought about it, about David and his apartment and the 2 weeks that had felt both endless and too brief. About the difference between the love you imagine and the love that actually exists in the messy reality of two people trying to connect. No, she said finally. It was exactly what I needed it to be. I just didn't know that's what I needed at the time. The final truth, the one Maya carried with her long after Tampa faded into memory, was this. You can't build intimacy through a screen. You can build connection, yes. Familiarity, certainly. But real intimacy requires presence. Requires seeing someone at their worst and choosing them anyway. Requires truth that can't be filtered or edited or carefully framed. She'd flown across the world looking for love and found something more valuable. She'd found herself. The version that could survive disappointment. The version that could be honest even when honesty was hard. The version that knew the difference between settling and choosing, between being alone and being lonely. David had taught her that, even if he hadn't meant to. He'd shown her what happens when you perform instead of existing, when you hide behind carefully constructed versions of yourself because you're afraid the real you isn't enough. And Maya had learned the most important lesson of all, that she was enough, exactly as she was. No filters, no angles, no performance required. The woman who'd believed a video call could show her everything she needed to know had been wrong. But the woman who'd survived being wrong, who'd walked away when she needed to, who'd rebuilt herself from disappointment and chosen to stay open anyway, that woman was wiser, stronger, free. And sometimes, freedom costs exactly 7,000 miles and 2 weeks in Florida with a stranger who turned out to be someone she already knew, someone lonely, someone hiding, someone she'd recognize anywhere because she'd been hurt too once, before she learned that the person she'd been looking for all along wasn't on the other side of a screen. She was in the mirror, waiting to be found.